Unfortunately, I'm not much beyond where I was last week because I've been caught up with other projects and contracts, but still did make a few changes. Felix did a major change to the application and I made a minor one. So it's a bit more interesting to manipulate right now. But I think we should more speak about strategy. I mean, we said last time, and I don't know if you saw if Tim saw the recordings, we said we should try to have a format for claims that would forget about canonicality for now, so we could at least have right claims and look at the structure so that you have negation, claims about claims, at least for
like an
relevance.
incomplete model that we can actually program with.
Yeah.
Experiment.
Yeah. And I don't know if you saw that idea, Tim, and what you think of it as a way of just moving forward and experimenting.
I mean, I'm not sure what not worrying about canonicality saves us in terms of, I mean, it saves us on discussions, but I don't think it like does much of the model in terms of canonicality. All the other things, all the other modeling issues are all the same, I guess. So I don't think we gain or lose much by ignoring canonicality at this moment. Like the one thing for me that canonicality involves, there's two things, I guess. One is, you know, my concern or my reach for a primary key. And, so we can ignore that, that's fine. And the other is, you know, just having an equivalence relationship. So we could ignore that. And that's fine. I think we're still making progress if we solve other issues of just how do you model this argument, right? There's, I guess, a question of reuse. Is reuse still on the table? Is ignoring canonicality also mean forgetting about reuse? I guess is one question.
Perfectly valid.
For me, reuse is still possible, but only within one context. Then. So,
but context to you means it's a sub branch of an argument tree.
It's a media
it's all
source.
Within the same.
For me, is the quickest, like the closest term to it. Like suppose that you're having a discussion just with two people, it would already be useful to discuss argument structure between those two people before they even try to add these claims to a canonical claim database. Where the shared context, it's assumed that both people have attended the full discussion. That's the shared context in that case.
We had actually an interesting discussion on what context means. We've been using three notions of context. The one that Stephen just gave, media source. My definition is closer to, in a way, community, because there's an explicit community boundary and an explicit decision procedure within the community. And the community can be one person, of course. But for deciding whether a name fits a certain definition and for deciding plausibility of a claim, because it's within the community, we can take such decisions. But forget even the plausibility of claims, just think of naming. And the other one is more the emergent cultural context, which vague boundaries about the way a certain word is used in a certain subcommunity. And we got last time Stephen and I realized that we were stumbling a lot on the well-defined community versus fuzzy community thing. I think I wasn't aware of what you just proposed, the media source, but it makes sense also.
Well, I think one media source can be modeled as what you would call your community. I think I like the concept of community we tried to talk about last time. And I would definitely try to investigate further to which degree. Actually, that's one of the things we had on the backlog microphone for you to go over that process of looking for an example community, an example assumption within a community, and how a claim within that community can be made canonical. It's going to give a lot of insight into what a community is, what makes claims within a community different from claims in a canonical database. So as a thought exercise, that's one suggestion.
Right. Yeah, and as I said, I did not have time to progress, unfortunately.
But we can do that together now.
Absolutely. I think that's a good use of our time. Absolutely. Let me, where would that be? Okay, this is going to be really, so suppose we have, and I'm going to use this pseudo turtle, right? Where I'm saying claim, and let's just say there's a statement. Well, actually, do I want to formalize or go informal?
What are you doing?
I'm trying to write a claim in that belongs to a community and informal. So informal.
But let's start by deciding what a community could be. Like before going to modeling, let's first say, like, okay, would you call a community like two people that start a discussion? Could that be a community?
Yes. Yeah. For me,
well, I do have a problem with this, or a serious doubt with this process, which is it's weird. You want to get rid of canonicality to simplify things, and now you want to introduce communities, which adds all sorts of new complexity. You can't even define it. It doesn't seem like you're simplifying. You're rather going for a totally different objective.
I think part of the objective is exactly to better understand what makes something canonical and what isn't canonical, and how can you go from one to the other. Because right now we have so many working definitions of canonicality.
But then you're not focusing on just modeling the different kinds of arguments. You're focusing on understanding canonicality versus community, the different objective.
At this point, yes.
It's true that this is a different objective. I mean, we propose doing something simpler just so we could play with arguments. And then I said, yeah, really, actually, I think the canonicalization with the notion of community is not that complex. And then we got into that. But maybe we should separate those things. Can we do the claim structure discussion without getting into canonical versus community-based definition? And maybe that's a good separate objective. I'm certainly interested in canonical versus community-based. Like, this is in a way what I was trying to do with Woost, with the work with Felix. And just having, this worked, and now suddenly it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right?
Yes, exactly.
I don't see it, and I don't know what changed. Oh yes, I think I know. I don't know if that will show really what's going on.
We don't see what you're doing right now.
No, I realize.
Okay.
Sorry. And no, I don't know if that will illustrate it that much, but just what I was trying to say is I have things that use names and things that use topics. I mean, another frame, like this is a frame, and this is another frame, and this is another frame. And here I'm looking through some frames, and each of them, some frames refer to names within them, and some frames refer to other frames, like this frame refers to this frame, refer to another frame. And if I had it, I could see in theory, oh no, we don't have that set up, but I could see which frame that is and have the nested frame inclusion here. And what I had in mind, just in a way, it's kind of answering Stephen's question, is use frames with names as informal, local, community-based, and then say, well, if I'm replacing a name with a frame that defines the name, I'm making it more universal. Of course, that other frame may contain names, so there's a recursivity there. But the idea is some names are ground when they are shared between many communities, and you'd have to know that a name is explicitly shared between communities to know that, like, this name in this community is taken to be the same as that same name or another name in another community. And that gives it a grounding. And that means anything that uses that name, hence, is well grounded in that community. So that's what I was going towards. And I wanted to make examples of this. And that's something I didn't have time to finish. But the ability to have these kind of two versions of a claim, the one with local names, like non-canonical local names, and saying, okay, now let's ground them in either known shared names or definition using known shared names. And the known shared names set would change in the sense that as names become accepted by other communities, more names would become known shared, and as names get contested as ambiguous, they would leave. So this is a transient status. Well-groundedness is a transient status, but still we could have a kind of measure of how well-grounded a certain claim is in terms of how consensual the underlying terms are. So that's what I was aiming at. In terms of defining well-groundedness, and not exactly canonicality, but a social measure of well-groundedness. Now, I did not progress on that as much as I wanted because other things took over, and probably will for some time, but I don't know if that answers Stephen's question, and certainly doesn't answer Tim's concern that this is another direction.
I mean, I'm okay with going different directions at different times. I don't know the reasons behind your decision for one thing over the other, but we just need to make sure if we all agree to go one direction, we're not going a different direction. But we have a ton of unresolved questions about how to model argumentation in general, right?
That's true. And that's certainly a good use of our time as well. No problem there. Actually, what do we have in our that's old, I think. DB schema, GSL, hierarchy 3. Oh. Okay, not usable. Not usable. I'm trying to find stuff that is less base hyper knowledge and more about claim structure among my stuff. and it exists. I'm not sure it's here. No, it's not here. Okay. Nope. Nope.
So you're trying to find a simple claim-based model right now?
Yeah, I have something. I had written a lot of claim-based things, and I'm trying to find them among my stuff.
I mean, for what purpose? So we can talk about it right now, or
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's not a good one, but it's there. Okay, that's vaguely. God. Just so we remember what we were arguing about. So yeah, that's what I have. CD concern, that's when I was working with posits, so it's probably a bit obscure. Though it did have the notion of negation well done. Claim, derived claim, distinction, entity, that remains valid. That's more about casting, but it's still useful. Associated claim, proto-claim, oh God. Formalization. The basic idea we had stopped with, maybe this is the closest, is we have claims about claims, and opposition and support are claims about claims, and those can themselves be opposed or supported. And for negation, what we need really is simply, well, not simply, but simply a model of negation. I think what we want is more a notion of mutual exclusion than negation. Negation for me is a special case of mutual exclusion in a way.
I thought the idea of negation was that we can unify support and oppose, like Stephen does.
Yeah, absolutely. But the okay, here's how I see it. If you say A supports B, and then you say C is mutually exclusive with A, and then you have proof of C. C is part of the negation of A, but it's not necessarily the negation of A. It can be, a subset of the negation of A, and it still makes A support for B fall. And that's why I'm saying it's really useful to have the ability to define that things are mutually exclusive. Like negation, like proving the negation is sometimes really hard, but proving that you're in a subcase of the negation, sometimes it's harder, of course, by definition, but sometimes it's clearer, so to speak. Not that it matters terribly. I mean, of course we can have negation, but I'm just thinking a bit intuitionistically here.
Okay, are we diving into modeling right now, or should we talk about high-level goals?
Yeah.
Else I would I thought about.
Sorry, I'm a bit tired and disjointed
Yeah.
today. Apologies, and thank you for keeping me on track. And I'm kind of taking over. This should be, Tim is here. It should be his day.
No, isn't today Stephen's Day?
It's Stephen's Day, yes.
Yeah, but I abandoned the glossary for a bit, right? I want to focus on other things, so I have no agenda.
Okay. I think the agenda is to define the agenda going forward.
Exactly.
And that's really the agenda we're trying
And
to.
like, and that's like for Tim, it was like, okay, should we just continue the process as last year, or is there a way we can learn more from an intermediate model that's incomplete? But
We can learn a lot from an intermediate model that's incomplete. And I think, what would be really cool if all our discussions could somehow turn into dog fooding all those things, right? I work on defining definitions. If we actually had some sort of working model for definitions and we're using it, and if we're debating how to model something or whatever, if it were natural for us to go and start organizing our thoughts around an actual argument map. I want to see this slowly creep into being useful in our daily lives. I'll get at a need that needs scratching, which is just over and over again, people debating all over the place. Right? A debate popped up again at school, the parents of our school, about our school is forcing vaccination. And if there were a way to quickly gather the arguments being made into a way that you could show it, hand it to people in a platter, that would help keep the discussion organized, right? That's the sort of thing that I would love to
But that's
have
the exact,
for getting the canonicality, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's why we discussed that, like forgetting about canonicality for the time being, because right
That's
now it's even
fine.
hard to define what that is. And on top of that, it would be interesting to see how the two map together. I mean, I have a pretty good intuition of how I want to approach these things, but we keep struggling when we try to define the most basic things for me that pointed at, such as fragments, such as contextual claims, such as these are for me the things that go from the contextual to the canonical. And we've so far avoided that discussion by assuming that all claims are canonical. Or are entered in this canonical database, but we haven't really focused on the, let's have an in-context discussion. What is even the context? What's the scope of that context, etc.? And what does that mean for other people? And viewing that those claims made in that context, in different contexts, what happens? So that's my suggestion, because I think that's where there's too much ambiguity, and I don't think we're really understanding each other there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're basically suggesting we should continue with the glossary, but focus on exactly these topics? Or no, I just want to understand what you suggested.
I mean, we got stuck with the glossary with trying to define fragment and contextual claim, and I don't think I can say much more about that. So yeah, I don't fully understand why we got stuck there. But it might help going a bit more high level and first just defining exactly how does a canonical claim database fit into a picture of like two people having a discussion, which is highly contextual. I think that might clarify some things. And
yeah, I mean, I could answer that question right away, the way I see it, but
yeah,
Go ahead.
I would see it being somewhat of a replacement for what we currently do, which is in the debate, in the WhatsApp debate, which is a terribly unwieldy interface for debating. Someone makes several offhand comments at the same time, such as, anyway, everybody who, the vaccine doesn't stop transmission and the vaccine is experimental anyway. And although I got vaccinated and I think you should get vaccinated, I don't think it should be forced on people. Okay, there are lots of claims that were made there. Let's organize that. And, I might respond by saying, well, it does slow spread. I may say that, right? So how am I going to respond? It may say slow spread. I may say that and anticipating they're going to respond by saying, no, it doesn't. It's been proven it doesn't. And I'll say, but yes, it has, right? I'll go straight to finding an article that confirms my personal bias or my own personal original opinion. Yes, the vaccines slow the spread, right? And so I'm pausing before I respond. I go to the internet, I look for an article that confirms my opinion, and I post it in there as if I've done some scientific research. I would rather replace that with, well, here's the accumulated knowledge of this discussion around whether or not the vaccines are effective. And I find that, and I post it here and say, well, here are the conclusions so far. And from my opinion, it seems that it does slow, even though it doesn't stop. And the person may respond by saying, but if you look deeper down here, somebody made an argument that we have no data on Omicron. And it seems that Omicron is spreading in spite of vaccines, right? That's how I would like to, one way I can see this as interacting in our lives in a discussion in real time, right? As a more reliable and easier reference.
I think I don't see why you put them in a position, because for the second step you describe, I think the first step is needed, right? You start by putting articles and then you discuss the articles that compose them. And at some point you have, okay, here's what we came up with.
No, but I'm assuming that, whoever is looking for articles in this discussion, it's just parents at a school. And the point made over and over again, whether, depending on which side you're going to defend, is, well, the school aren't doctors, and so we should be listening to doctors or something, but the point is, the canonical debate, if it's already out there, is going to be way ahead of this discussion of family parents. And so those articles have already been broken down and have already been whatever by experts. And so I just need to go quick, pull out the other work other people.
I was emphasizing the process of building it first. I'm saying
right.
The first process is essential to the second, but yes, I agree.
I agree. Yeah.
Okay, good, no problem. Go on.
So it sounds like here you're just assuming there's a perfect canonical claim for the use case that you want to link to already available on the internet. So it exists a priori and you just link to that. And it just so happens to be fully defined and correct with the definitions also as they were currently in use in that context.
No, and I know that there were problems with that building for canonicality has to solve, which is, for example, the evolution of the claim over time and the bifurcation of different slight variations. How do we make that all manageable? Which is one of the reasons I say the past should stay in the past and you just look at the most current iteration. But that is a problem the interface has to solve. And maybe we don't have to solve that right now. Maybe we solve the other problems.
I think they assume a starting position where there are no canonical claims. And that's always going to be the case if you start a new discussion. I mean, you come up with this ideal, but it's already there and I link to it. But you start a new discussion that's highly contextual and you want to discuss that. What do you do?
Okay, but pause 1 second. I would just say the whole point of canonicality is lay people. We avoid lay people starting from scratch.
It's not lay people, it's two researchers.
No, I'm talking about the parent discussion, which is the scratch I'm trying to hit here, right? Okay, but somebody has to start from scratch, sure, okay. It's two researchers. What if they happen to be the two researchers that are on the, what they call the antithesis side of never trust big health, never trust the government, and they're starting the discussion? Is their findings going to aggregate into the findings of the people on the thesis side of the vaccine debate?
You want to get dog food, so I mean, just take any discussion between us right now. That's another example.
Then, yeah, dog food. I do want to start, and I am agreeing we need to start somewhere in building this or in designing arguments. So I'm fine with starting with the 2 people discussing, lay people, just
4
having
people.
a discussion thing. Whatever,
Like,
4 people. Yeah.
We are a highly contextual group with trying
Or
to
all the
discuss claims.
families of my daughter's school, right? Yes, I want to dog through that. And
That's
I
a
can
starting
give up
point.
on
There are
it being
no
canonical.
There are no
right?
canonical claims at this point. There's nothing in the database. So what do we do? Like, suppose there's a claim that we want to discuss at this point. Like, where do we start?
I would just want an easier user interface than debate map. And I would forget about preserving all history. I would want a tool that lets me collect the arguments, which means we would have to solve certain questions about, well, how do you model that argument somebody's making? And that would be useful to discuss.
Then-
Oh, well, they brought up that
then we're-
point. How do we, yeah.
Then we're back in the modeling discussion, right?
Well,
No,
that's what I want.
That's a UX conversation you want, and
It's both. Yeah.
It's both, like the model, like model and UX both inform each other, I guess.
So I'm happy to go down that route, is creating better tools for us to do it real time, forget canonicality. It will inform our understanding of what kind of arguments people make and how to model them. And it'll also maybe be useful to us.
it's certainly useful to me as well. One question, however, it's when you say something different than debate map. I have a lot of issues with debate map being certain classic nodes and arrows. Is that your problem with debate map, or do you want a usability of a good, or do you, for example, want to include negation the way Stephen does, or is that part of what you see as having a better debate map?
I would say the reasons why it should not be debate map. One is, I just find the user interface clunky, and maybe we can strip it down and make it a little more quick to maneuver in and do the things you want to do in more of a real-time modeling situation. I find debate map to be, well, but half of my problems, in fact, a lot of the slowness of doing this kind of thing is figuring out how to model people's arguments, right? So I can't blame debate map for that. But so the other thing is,
my main point there is a lot of the problems with modeling people's arguments is context. Like the way people traditionally in previous, including debate map, the way most people model arguments is highly contextual. They model one map based for the context of that one person, and that one person does the interpretation. Hence, when you try to reuse any claims, these assumptions of the entire map are there. Like you're going to have indexical references and all of that, and that's why I want to address. For me, canonical claims stand on their own. That's why I emphasize standalone claims so much, and that for as far as why I developed Socrates, that was the main thing I focused on that Chiala didn't even do properly. Like if you want to start having canonical claims, you need to have claims that can be reused and that stand on their own. Now the question is, where does that leave all the other claims that people make in everyday life? Highly contextual claims that are still very much needed. Again, it's also the main feedback that I got, like, well, you don't just start adding canonical claims and it's difficult to do so. You always fall like into like, you start referring to things accidentally, which reshapes the meaning if you look at it in different contexts. Yeah. Like, how do we solve that problem? And that's why I want to look at like claims tied to a clear context and claims that you need to agree on should be interpreted as standalone.
Yeah, and the link, the interpretation link between those, and that's a claim. Interpretation is a claim, exactly. And identifying entities is a claim, and identifying, that's...
Because do you agree, Timothy, that impacts the model? I mean, if the model assumes that you're aware about the full argument map, sure. I mean, we have that. We have argument mapping tools where you can perfectly map current arguments if you neglect indexicality. That's possible, but that's not a canonical claim argument map, correct?
I mean, I doubt that the tools that exist cover every type of argument we've come against. So you know, I'm not totally sure that's true that we could use that. I think we may be pushing some boundaries there.
But do you see that it's easier if you have one curator managing an argument map and just trying to model? But that doesn't scale.
And I'm, you know, I'm trying to answer your question. I was thinking, but you know, well, how would I do this in a real-time discussion? Is you pause and check with the participants? Is that what you meant? And to some degree, it might be no, I didn't mean that. And you go, yeah, but I'm going to put that here because it's another point. Right. This is one of the reasons why I think of the solution in canonical case sometimes is to bifurcate when there's different interpretations of something, capture them both and resolve one branch and leave the other branch open or discuss the other branch. But yeah, when it's not canonical and it's within a group, you do have the liberty of circling back and checking if that was the interpretation. And then you don't have to model interpretation, right?
So, and that's why yeah, sure, in an ideal use case, you link to an already fully modeled canonical claim, but the canonical claims arise out of a highly contextual process. And I think that's why it's also relevant to start looking more at like in context discussions where indeed you have a claim, you just reply very naturally, and then maybe at a certain point in that discussion, you can start agreeing.
I don't know. I think canonical claims are just translations for contextual claims.
I know you think that, and I think it's a bit more tricky than that because the context is undefined, and that's the whole problem. Like, if a canonical claim can stand on its own, it means in any context you place it, people will be able to use it and carry on the conversation about that claim usefully, right? Or they need to split up, etc., as we've just talked about many times. But like a claim in context is totally different because one of the things when Martin 1 talks about grounding, that's super useful when you're having a discussion in a community where you have shared assumptions. You don't need to start talking about the shared assumptions anymore. Like,
I think that's partially false because a community does not share the same knowledge. You get new members to the community, and then how do you incorporate new members? They don't have the shared context yet. They have parts of the shared context.
Yes.
So
by making it transparent
that,
which people agree with which assumptions, and that's part of what we talked about last time. And yes, that's also why well-groundedness is a emergent property. It's not like this from now on is well-grounded. Indeed, if new members join the community and they disagree with some of the main assumptions, you can say, well,
this thing which was thought to be well-grounded at one point
or
has
they can
lost grounding in this community.
That's what happens to us all the time. We have to go back to the definitions. Yeah.
But so that's one interesting way of defining or saying what context is. If you have a shared community that all shares a basic set of assumptions, they all believe in them, then indeed you won't have to model all of that explicitly. You don't have to include that in every claim to make it canonical and useful in the community.
Yeah, if the tool is just modeling a current discussion, right? Mm-hmm. Then it's just, you don't even have to define the context. It's just the context is what we're talking about, and
the point is precisely that we want to go from something that's grounded in one community to something that is more canonical, that is grounded in what I call a broader community, because I don't believe in absolutes. Humanity is a community, right? Or usually a linguistic community. And so what we do is we have, okay, we've defined up to this level because we've taken that as a ground truth in this community. And then we meet another community and they disagree with that. Okay, it's not a ground truth anymore. So then we say, okay, we have to define this in terms of what we as a broader community can agree on. and again, that doesn't mean we agree, but we'll at least agree on the definitions, because we can say the way we use this term or the way we use this premise, it's defined in terms of those things which we do agree on in this broader super.
That's implicit. That's implicit. That's my point. That process of defining the premises a community agrees on is implicit, and that's not the same as a canonical claim that can be used in any context. If you are like the main criteria always for proper discussions and informal logic is acceptability. I mean, you should check in with one another. Do you find this claim acceptable? You do this test over and over, and you build up this set of claims that you all accept, and you start deriving logic from that. That is missing in a canonical claim database. You don't have that. On the other hand, in context, when you're having discussion, you can ask a group of people to express the acceptability of certain claims. And you can assume that when you're talking about relevance, you could, for example, state that, well, if you're participating in this community, we presume that you accept all of these. But then you cannot just start using, well, my question is, what does that mean if you pull out a claim out of the community and put it in a canonical database? You no longer have that implicit agreement of acceptability. That's not shared.
Right. This is, community context is essentially a shared set of shortcuts, things you don't need to state explicitly.
Yes.
Because if it's a canonical claim, it's a concept, and it should be the same concept independent of community, right?
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, making a contextual claim canonical is just the process of stating explicitly each relevant assumption or definition until anybody from any community can understand it, right?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is this is potentially an infinite regress.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing to cut the infinite regress is to do it one community join at a time. So you start in a community, so you only go this far. And then you say, okay, we're talking to this other community, they disagree on this. Okay, so we have to go further. And then we talk to another.
I see it as one unstated assumption or definition at a time rather than community steps. I see it as, but you don't know what that word means here. You never heard.
Yeah, exactly. But you realize that we don't agree on this word by meeting somebody who doesn't understand it.
Who might be within the same community. That's my point about newcomers to the community not understanding. Right?
Sure. But I suspect that what will happen is you'll have a group of people agreeing on this much. And it's when, you're right, it's when you meet one more person, that person being and for me, community is very ad hoc, and like you include one more person, you've changed the community. Sure.
So my main question, I mean, there's a lot of questions that arises, but that gives rise to rather. But what does that mean for canonical claims? That's really my main concern.
I'm not sure what you mean by what does it mean.
I think it basically means that canonical claims, like if you pull them out and look at them without looking at the communities, it means like you still sometimes the claim still has to refer to in which communities has it been used or something like this. So you have easy access to all the implicit statements that everybody agrees on.
I think that's right.
I don't think so. I think every claim has a degree of ambiguity, right? And you just need to keep resolving ambiguities as people question them or get confused by them.
By the way, let me see how I see this process. The claims are made in a community, and so at some point, but they're expressed as a representation, and the representation doesn't belong to the community.
Well, it implies that's the thing.
No, that's a nuance I'm trying to get across, and maybe I'm not saying it right. As long as the definition has name bindings. Well, the name bindings are part of the community, but suppose, and in a way it always has name bindings, but it's a representation. It can be given more sense in a community, or it can be given more sense by being shared between communities. But what I'm saying is you will want to know where has this been used so that we understand more about the context where this has arisen. But the representation exists as a thing. It's an immutable blob. And you can ask the question, where is it being used? If it's not intelligible to someone outside.
No, but you're missing the point that it's not about representation. It's about the fact that there's other representations that I also use in the community that I implicitly refer to. Like, people tend to make claims about other claims by implicitly referring to assumed shared assumptions.
Correct.
When you then pull that claim into another community that doesn't have these shared assumed assumptions, discussion breaks down because you can no longer even agree on relevance.
I hear you. No, you're right. But what I'm saying is this is about, there's two things. There's whether the claim is well defined. That is, if you take out all the entities and do they have definitions?
When it's canonical, I would say.
Yeah,
that's my definition of canonical.
Yeah. And there's what are the unspoken assumptions that make it plausible? And that's totally a distinct issue, right? So what I'm saying is, when you say this claim is plausible, you're probably implying unspoken assumptions that you have that you don't realize you have. And at some point, somebody will say, I don't think that's plausible, and you'll discuss and you'll discover a shared assumption. Then
well, maybe not even unspoken. They might be spoken assumptions that I simply mentioned in another claim used in the same community.
Exactly. What I'm saying is, there's a point where you should make the link between the original claim and the unspoken assumption explicit, and then replace the the original untagged claim by, oh, here's a claim with one more one more presupposition explicit.
To make it canonical, but
to make it canonical. And then that thing becomes shared. And then if somebody finds the original claim without the explicit link, they can look around in various communities and say, oh, in this community, they've replaced this version by that version with this link to the presupposition made explicit. So we can now know, we can do the same and now know that this presupposition was explicit, or maybe we had a different presupposition.
Does that mean that there are only canonical claims? Or, because that's still my question here. For me, I see a real distinct operation between stating something within a community where you have some understanding of shared assumptions, you're having a discussion, we have in the past agreed on, do you accept that? Yes, you agree with that, okay. That's for me a different type of claim than a claim where the only thing you can assume is what is made explicit. And that at that point may not be including the shared assumption that was stated before. Yet when you're making claims in that community, you are very quickly, implicitly gonna add arguments based on these shared assumptions, even though they're not made explicit. And that's where canonicality breaks. That's why you can't just add any claim from any community in a canonical database and assume that it will be useful across different contexts.
Yeah, I would make the links explicit even in a community. But go ahead, Tim.
First of all, I think you guys are using canonicality in a different way from my use of the word, or my definition of the word, right?
I think this discussion is trying to define it.
maybe. But it, like, what I see you using the term as is reusable across communities, or understandable without having prior context, right? Yeah, something like that. To me, canonicality is there's only one. Right? There's only one representation. It's a singleton, right? and it's the official singleton for that, which means, like, to me, it's the concept that is canonical. Well, now I'm
Okay,
yeah, I'm tripping over myself here a little bit.
Oh, no, I
But,
see what you're okay, go ahead.
right, so that's why equivalent classes are useful. But there's the other problem of, well, if this concept is ambiguous and people are interpreting it two different ways, what they're really doing is they're considering two separate concepts that are two separate canonical things, and they're seeing those other things within this representation here. And how do we deal with that, right?
I think the claim that Stephen is making, and which I do stand behind, is that well-groundedness is a necessary condition for canonicality. If you're using, if a thing is not well-grounded, it's because you're using indexical local names. And if you're using indexical local names, how can you be canonical?
But that's not a definition of canonicality that Tim just stated, I think.
But what I'm saying is it's a necessary condition. Is it a sufficient condition? You're right to ask, Tim. You're saying maybe being well-grounded and context independent and non-indexical is not enough for it to be canonical in a sense unique. But it's certainly a necessary condition. I have no doubt of that. But Stephen, you're saying I'm not using your definition right?
Timothy's definition. The main problem is canonicality is not properly defined. I think Timothy is simply arguing for unique concepts and equality between concepts. So you can have an ambiguous, not well-defined thing and agree that that is a concept, and all agree that that is not well-grounded. I don't see why a canonical claim, why all canonical claims should be well-grounded, if that's the definition. Unless you, of course, argue that canonical claims are well-grounded claims, but then you're changing the definition. I don't think that was Timothy's point.
Right.
Okay. I do think that if there's an ambiguity, the ambiguity will at some point be relevant, will have a fork, and that means the thing
but that process we agree on, actually, we've talked about it many times, and I think that's one of the fruitful outcomes. But I think we have a shared understanding that happens on standalone claims. The main problem I'm still highlighting is the assumption that standalone claims exist is a bit flawed, because people will use contextual claims as if they're standalone claims, and that's going to give problems when yeah, go ahead, Felix.
No, I absolutely agreed, but this is why I'm saying transforming claims which are false standalone claims into true standalone claims for me is part of the process. Like what I'm saying, when you say, oh, the shared assumptions won't be explicitly marked, I'm saying, let's mark them explicitly. Let's have the, it's not, you're saying attach the claim to a community. I'm saying you don't have to do that as long as all the presupposition are made explicit. If they're not explicit, yeah, sure, we need to trace the thing back to the community to identify.
They never are. They never are.
They never are at first. It's like anything. It's like they're not standalone at first. They're not explicitly marked with presupposition at first. That's what the process is about.
Yes. So at first, does it mean that at first it's not a standalone claim and people know that, or you consider everything a standalone claim and they're simply? But I feel like you wanted to say something. Maybe you should.
Yes. Yeah. Right. So because we're talking about shared assumptions, how about we introduce a new entity, shared assumption, which can be used across communities?
That's what I call context. I want to model context, yes, and I think definitions are one form of context.
Yeah. And we introduce these shared assumptions lazily whenever they're needed.
But that still doesn't solve a problem. If you open the link I just sent, because we keep talking about dog fooding, and I do dog food, and this is not coming from nowhere, that this problem. This is the main problem that I've always had on soccer trees and that I've seen on Kialu. If people, this is a claim added by Joshua. If you see this out of context, because again, it's supposed to be a canonical claim, right? Sure, you can mold it entirely. There will not generally be an equal quantity of underlying supporting and opposing arguments. What is this about? So people have a tendency
arguments are generally written in response to the thing, the conclusion, right?
Yes. So, but if you do that, then no argument, no claims are ever reusable because they're always linked to. Then you have Kialu.
The text is not reusable. What is the concept here? We have to interpret because he didn't make it explicit, but I could guess that it is either in an argument tree, there will generally not be an equal quantity of underlying supporting and opposing arguments, or on soccer trees, there will, like we would have to guess some of the missing pieces, which is what it's not what I wouldn't consider shared assumption to be an object that's necessary. It's just disambiguation, which we've been talking about all along.
But that means here, this then is not a canonical claim. Like when you add arguments, you're not adding canonical claims. It's not written as
a canonical claim. It's not written as a canonical claim.
And that's the problem. It never is. People don't do that. And
that's why in the white paper I talk about curators whose job is to go and clean this stuff up, and what is a curation process that moves things towards more generically understandable, which I guess you're calling standalone. But so in other words, my solution to your problem is everything is a standalone claim. It's just that they need to be cleaned up by somebody who knows how to do that sort of thing and has the time. Right.
But they're not. I think.
What do you mean they're not?
Not everything is a standalone claim. Like either you consider it as a standalone claim or you don't.
That's what he's saying. He's saying converting claims to standalone claims is a curator's job.
But which claims do you convert
Except
to standalone
claims? It's created as a standalone claim. It is a standalone claim from the beginning because what your argument is a concept. And the concept is something that should be shared, and it's something that can be reused. There's nothing in there, the only thing that impedes this argument from being reused is the way it's written. And yet, if you make arguments there underneath it, listen to this point. The debate ensues underneath there with everybody who's doing the debate, doing it within context and all that stuff, right? So they just go ahead and respond to that argument, right? Let's say the concept is in argument maps, there's generally not a need and blah, blah, blah. And somebody brings in proof and whatever and creates an argument map. The moment somebody rewrites that title to be more generically understandable without having to know what its conclusion was, those arguments that were made underneath there are still relevant, which means at the moment you were debating it within context, it was a standalone claim because that information is still reusable. It's just, it wasn't written that way. So somebody comes in out of the blue isn't going to understand what you're talking about, but you disambiguate and those arguments are still relevant.
So you need to know the context it was used in order to rewrite it, correct?
Correct.
Because you wouldn't be able to rewrite this if you look at it independently.
Wait. Pause now. If you don't, what is the job of the curator in that moment? I don't know what the hell they're talking about.
Exactly.
I'm going to, and it doesn't have to be a curator that does it, but I'm going to propose variations on it. I propose two. That's what I did here when we were talking. One proposal is it was referring to soccer trees, and another is it was referring to argument maps in general.
But should you, how are you going to figure that out?
You don't have to.
You don't have to.
What do you mean you don't have to?
Because both are valid, more context-free arguments. Both are valid interpretations as far as you know. And it doesn't matter so much, death of the author, which one was meant. The question is which one do people want to continue arguing about, and where will be the center of gravity? As long as they're better distinguished,
there is an answer to that question. there's heuristics to answer the question. The first thing is it was created as an argument with a conclusion. So you follow up, there is a context, the context is the argument map itself, right? So you go up there and try to figure out what they were talking about. The other one is the tree below, which is, well, if I choose this definition, it looks like half these arguments are no longer relevant. And if I choose that definition, they make more sense. So I'll choose that definition. Right?
Exactly, but that's what I call context and how you choose what to look at.
But what
right,
I'm
so there
saying,
are heuristics that help, but both concepts are totally valid.
I'm saying that in some cases, at least, and probably many, the right answer is to create both interpretations, because some arguments will make sense with one and some arguments would make sense with the other, and to split the ambiguous statement into the less ambiguous forms and let each less ambiguous form live on as long as it's deemed useful.
And as we've talked about too, this act may be done later on when there's already been confusion. And so you have this evident difference in opinion over which arguments are relevant, and you split it off, and hopefully you maintain all the arguments and you start getting more consensus over, or consistency in terms of, yeah, for this version, these are the relevant arguments, and for that version, those are the relevant arguments. So
yeah, this is an example of an argument that was thought well grounded at the moment of creation because there was enough shared context. And then as you expose to a broader community, it's realized that it's not well grounded. Many of the definitions are ambiguous. So you interpret it as more well grounded, more standalone. I'm not sure if they're synonymous, but I suspect they are more standalone claims.
Okay, my main assertion remains that if you do that, you're not going to have reusable claims that I call standalone claims, but the requirement is that they are indeed reusable, I would argue, and that this for me is not a reusable claim. That's why it's still a draft.
No, I agree. But
because that's so integral to the process of argument mapping, and you don't make standalone claims. The majority of claims made while having a discussion are contextual. My current approach is to not consider them standalone. They are contextual, they're not reusable in a standalone canonical argument database. And yes, curators can try to make them contextual and make suggestions saying, this one here, a contextual form is there. And even the original people uttering the highly contextual statement can say, yes, that is what I meant. That is my current approach, by not considering all of them standalone claims because they aren't.
I don't think it's different, Stephen. I think we're both saying we have non-standalone claims, and then we have a process by curators, by who may or may not be aware of the context, of trying to make them standalone, trying to make them what I call better grounded. The point I'm making is that it's always aspirational. You're never absolutely standalone, and that you may disagree with, but there's certainly the notion that there's really clearly not standalone claims that we start with, and then we make them as standalone as practical in a given context.
I would call your definition of ambiguous, the original one. This is ambiguous because it doesn't point to, it obviously point to context that's missing. So this can point to anything depending on the context.
Yeah. I agree.
It's not nuance, it's pure ambiguous.
And then you interpret it as a less ambiguous claim.
But the point is, do you want this claim to live in a canonical database? Do you think this is going to be useful? Do you want this to be reusable?
We've had this discussion many times. I think it is important to distinguish claims that have needed interpretation from claims that haven't, in the sense that it is ideally you want to direct people with views that have only claims that are so far unambiguous, but I insist on the so far because ambiguity can be discovered later. But also, I think, yes, I would keep ambiguous terms in the grand database, maybe not in the unambiguous view, because it's helpful for people who re-enter a claim similar to that form. It's like, oh, this looks like that claim. And oh, by the way, that was ambiguous, so I need to be aware of these later steps of distinctions that were useful to make it less ambiguous.
Yeah, you can still do that even if, yeah, okay, that's.
I mean, I think to answer your question that there are two problems with not having them in the canonical database, right? Which is, the first one is people are going to want to reuse them regardless of whether they've been given the stamp of canonicality or not. Somebody's going to say, oh, I remember that argument. See here.
But
And
maybe
look,
at that
you're
point you
wrong
make
over
it
here as well
canonical.
because here. So what?
Maybe at that point you make it canonical and you add interpretation from a contextual one to the, maybe that's the thing.
Okay, but then the second thing is, at that moment, you want to reuse the accumulated knowledge that came with it, all the discussion that went on underneath, because that's the point.
To make it canonical, to make it contextual.
Then you need to make all of them canonical. And yes, that's the hard part of argument mapping.
It is.
Canonical argument mapping.
We agree. I think we all agree on that.
Yeah. But
yes, I would keep the original form because it's useful for people who come again at the original form to be able to.
well, in Gruff, the way I did it, yeah, in Gruff, the way I did it was that, you know, an argument was modeled as, you know, a connector between a premise and a conclusion, right? And if you didn't have a text for the argument, then the text shown was the premise text, which would be written in a canonical sense, or should be written in a canonical manner.
Yeah, but that's what we're discussing. That text is never written in a canonical, or hardly ever written in a canonical manner.
Okay, but then, you know, the curator comes and changes the premise to be written more canonically, but you still preserve the argument text, which is written in a more indexical format that's more readable, a more contextual format, right? Because when you make the argument towards the conclusion of, you know, we have a problem, you can't measure, what was the thing? You can't determine whether a debate is well formed by counting the number of arguments, I guess was the one that you're talking about there, right? So in there, you say, I think that they'll never be equally balanced. And in another one, you're using that as a conclusion to, oh, we should model the database in a B tree or something that keeps everything balanced, right? It's the same discussion about how people use argument maps, but the text you use in each case for the argument, right? The argument text is contextual, it's indexical, it's whatever. It abbreviates to make it more.
The premise as well, because this is a premise I linked to, by the way.
The premise, no, because the way I do it in Gruff would be that the premise should be written in a, you know, in the boring lawyerly sort of fashion.
Yeah, but that's the same here, and people don't do it. That's what I'm telling you.
People don't do it, right? So it's the curators who have to come and clean up, yes.
Yes, and by the way, Marc-Antoine, I'm not saying remove it. I'm saying put it in a different table, if you will, in a contextual claim table.
And that's what we've said.
Yes,
we've been through that many times.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm simply saying an argument tree of canonical claims. I wouldn't pollute that with contextual claims. And I'm saying it's highly likely that the majority of people from experience, they add contextual claims, and people want to do it and should be able to do that. So,
but yeah, the problem is that you mix, it becomes mixed because, you know, the one at the very top, the conclusion at the very top of the debate, right, is canonical, right? Is it not?
That depends whether you write it as canonical. And what, I don't know.
What is a debate starter that's non-canonical?
Well, it's about interpretation. Canonicality is also about interpretation and what I call embracing ambiguity. If you have an ambiguous claim that doesn't use definitions, and you need to agree that these definitions are still ambiguous. See you, Marc-Antoine. Oh, yeah, well.
I'll make you host.
Okay. But that's my claim. Maybe I'll add it on Socrates that I don't think contextual claims and
What did you get
claims
it?
should
Like,
be
Makaton's
mixed.
the host.
Oh, I'm the host now.
I've
Oh,
set
okay.
Stephen host of the
Mhm.
Wheeled Work. Sorry about that.
But I also need to leave, guys. Good discussion, I think.
Yeah, I think we're getting
Yeah.
to the core issues.
I think it was a lot of good discussions, but we didn't actually focus. The one thing we didn't
No,
do
we-
was to find our focus.
No,
and
but I
focus
think
on it.
this is still useful. Let's continue tomorrow. Same Zoom.
Okay.
Awesome.
Okay, see you
Ciao, ciao.
tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.